When I'm planning and researching my photo walks, one of my first ports of call is often YouTube to see what other people have done in similar situations, using similar techniques or going to similar locations. But when it came to searching about event photography, I found that the majority of tutorials that came back were about corporate events or weddings. I was going to photograph an agricultural show, which didn't really fit into these categories. So if you're wanting to photograph village fetes, little fairs or little festivals, then look no further than this video, because hopefully by the end you'll have a better understanding of how to photograph these sorts of events. The event I was going to photograph was the Great Yorkshire Show, one of the largest agricultural shows in the UK, where people flock from countrywide to share their animals, produce and pretty much everything, to be honest. Based at a purpose-built showground just outside the town of Harrogate in North Yorkshire, the Great Yorkshire Show is absolutely vast, and with thousands of people attending on every day that it's on during the summer of every year, it can be really difficult to A, find something to pinpoint to photograph, and B, make that photograph coherent so it's not so busy people's eyes are darting from one corner of the frame to the other without really stopping in between. So, alongside sharing the photographs that I made whilst exploring the Great Yorkshire Show, I'm going to impart some hints and tips in this video to help you to condense busy situations into coherent and interesting photographs. So let's start off with my first top tip, which is remembering that it's not all about single photos. In this day and age, there seems to be this feeling that every single photograph that we make has to be perfect and tell some kind of elaborate story. But when it comes to documentary photography, we often have to think of our photographs as being part of a series rather than individual things. If we think of it this way, we can put series of photographs together to tell a story rather than trying to get absolutely everything into the same shot. This will help us to A, simplify our content of our photographs down, and B, help people looking at our photographs to understand a narrative of the day or of the event that we were attending. My next top tip is to always look out for focal points. We all like those big wide vistas of a whole showground where there's so much going on, but these can be really distracting if they don't have something that is in the photograph that draws our eye to it. So sometimes looking for specific details within a wider scene that jumps out and says, "Look at me," to the viewer of your photograph will not only help your photographs to tell better stories, but they will also draw people's eye in and create intrigue as well. My next tip is to always think of the background. When we're out photographing, we often place so much emphasis on our subject matter that our mind forgets to think about the background to the photograph. Now, backgrounds in busy places can be really difficult to get right, because often the more simple the background, the better the photograph, because your eye is being drawn to the focal point even more. There are various different ways in which we can simplify backgrounds in busy spaces. One of those ways is to use a wider aperture and get closer to your subject, to make use of a shallow depth of field. When we do that, we can cast anything that's potentially distracting in the background out of focus. You can also look for colour contrast. It's useful to know that warmer colours such as reds, yellows and oranges stand out over cooler colours such as blues and greens. So photographing something warm and vibrant against a blue sky or green of grass if you're out and about on a showground like I was at the Great Yorkshire Show, it can really work in terms of drawing your viewer's eye to your subject and really making it pop. If you're outdoors and it's sunny, not that it usually ever is here in Yorkshire, but if you have got those conditions, then you can think of tonal contrast as well, placing your subject matter in the sun and the background in the shade. If you haven't got those sort of conditions, or you're inside, then you could potentially use a flash to illuminate your subject in the foreground and cast the background into darkness. Another way you can simplify your background is by dropping down. When you do this, you'll notice that the sky becomes much bigger if you're in an outdoor location, and the ground becomes much smaller, and your subject becomes bigger because you are projecting it above the horizon line and making much more of a song and dance about it within the composition of your photograph. My next tip may sound a little counterproductive, but bear with me, there's method in my madness. It is not to zoom too much, or at all if you can help it. Now you may think that zooms help you in certain situations in busy places because you can cut through crowds and zoom into little details. But what you will often find is that zoom lenses tend to be larger and you may feel a bit weighed down by them. If you're trying to get candid shots of people at the event, then they can often draw attention to you and people start posing or try and hide from you. On the surface, using a fixed focal length may appear quite restricting, but I would argue that it's quite the opposite. If you do use a prime lens, then you're going to have access to wider apertures to help you to shallow down that depth of field and get simpler backgrounds. But you'll also find yourself moving about more, exploring in more detail the things around you to get more interesting shots. You'll find that you fade into the background more because you're not in people's faces with this massive telephoto zoom. And it all just seems to fall into place. And believe me, if you haven't tried it, give it a go, because your photographs will take on a new lease of life, especially at busy events. few tips are all about injecting some variety into your photographs. There is a danger that if you follow the tips that I've given you so far as a set of rules, then you may start being a bit repetitive in the type of photographs that you make. Photographing from the same angle all the time or looking for similar subjects. But there is a way in which we can create variety at the same time as keeping continuity if you're creating a series of photographs rather than just one-offs. They come in the form of different types of shot that we can use to inject this variety into the photographs that we make. The first type of shot is an establishing shot. This is often a wider angled shot to give context of the event or location where you are. But remember what I said earlier about focal points. Make sure that there's something there to grab people's attention rather than it just being a wide open vista of a scene. The next type of shot is a candid close-up. Now this tends to be of people, or if you're at an event where there's animals like I was at the Great Yorkshire Show, then it could be of animals as well. Basically a candid close-up is where you get a photograph of somebody or something that doesn't necessarily know you're taking a photograph. So you capture them within a moment, where they may have a certain expression on their face that draws people in and helps people to make a connection with what's going on in the photograph. The next type of shot is an interaction shot. These are photographs where you photograph people interacting with each other. At the Great Yorkshire Show I was able to capture people interacting with animals, animals interacting with other animals, and maybe people or animals interacting with their environment. What these types of shots do is they create interest and intrigue in the viewer of your photograph. Instead of just looking at a straight scene, they're looking at a moment in time that they can think, ooh, I wonder what happened next. The last sort of shot that I would like to discuss with you is the detail shot. Now these can be close-ups or wide angles, but they don't tend to be of people or moving objects. They tend to be asides, still lives, to provide context to the show or event that you're attending and photographing. At the Great Yorkshire Show there were bags of wool that were left over from the sheep shearing competition. There were stalls with elaborate displays that made for interesting little aside shots. They may not be world beaters on their own, but these detail shots really weave into series and sequences of photographs really well. You can see how these different types of shot marry well with the tips that I was giving you earlier on. in order to add a bit of variety and freshness into the photographs that you make at a specific event. You don't necessarily have to follow them in an exact order. You don't have to start off with an establishing shot and work through the list from there. In fact, it's probably better if you don't, because it just spices up a series of photographs and helps people to jump from one to another and see a sort of narrative developing, even if there's not necessarily one there. So next time you visit your local village fete, a festival or a show as grand as the Great Yorkshire Show, then hopefully by watching this video you'll now have plenty of tips, tricks and techniques in your arsenal to come back with a series of varied and interesting photographs. If you've enjoyed this video and got something out of it, then please give us a thumbs up. It helps me to disseminate the channel with other interested and budding photographers. If you haven't yet subscribed to the Yorkshire Photo Walks YouTube channel, then please do so as well for more content like this. And if you'd like to learn practically out in the field about event photography, landscape photography, urban photography and more, then check out YorkshirePhotoWalks.com for our latest photo walk schedule, where we explore unique and inspirational Yorkshire locations and help you to get the best out of your camera. Until next time, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you later.